time again on my channel, we've explored the history of food because it's fun and it makes me hungry. In this video, I want to expand on the ancient buffet of black food history by discussing the socio-political factors of black American food in 26 distinct categories from A to Z. Grab a meal and get comfortable. If I don't make you hungry by the end of this video, I did not do my job. It's time for a discussion on more black food history.
I got beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes, lamb, rams, hogs, dogs, chicken, turkeys, rabbits, you name it!
Wallace Wally Amos was born in Tallahassee in 1936. After moving to New York City in 1948, he'd bake cookies with his favorite aunt, Della. Years later, he dropped out of high school and was working as a talent agent. And he was the first black one at William Morris Agency and signed Simon & Garfunkel while heading the rock department. When wooing potential clients, he'd give them a bag of his fresh baked cookies, eventually leading to Marvin Gaye and Helen Reddy investing $25,000 in a cookie store on Sunset Boulevard. Famous Amos led the gourmet cookie charge, selling 300,000 worth of cookies in his first year, more than 1 million in the next, and 12 million by 1982. Early press coverage emphasized the exclusivity of Famous Amos cookies and their expensive price, $3.50 for a 1-pound bag in 1978. To put that in perspective, that's $16.94 today, when Famous Amos cookies are basically everywhere. But in the 70s and 80s, they were novel.
Quiet and shy, he appeared at Stewart's today, keeping his typical low profile. His name is Wally Amos, better known as Famous Amos of cookie fame. He was in Louisville today to autograph, what else, his famous cookies.
I think it's necessary to talk to the cookies to give them encouragement, you know, to let them know that they're going out in the world and people are going to be buying them and that they have a responsibility to please, you know.
Diana Ross and Jack Nicholson were reported fans. Companies could also buy them wholesale, but it wasn't convenience stores in the early days. In 1976, it was reported that Bloomingdale's ordered 5,000 bags a week. Since the first Famous Amos store opened on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood on March 10, 1975, the gourmet cookie business has grown fatter and fatter. Precise figures are hard to come by, but Nation's Restaurant News, a trade journal, estimates that high-priced cookies generate $500 million a year in over-the-counter sales, and at least that much through supermarkets. But this profitability wouldn't last. The problem? Amos was bad at business and never hired the proper business manager. He sold his majority stake in 1988, losing access to the Famous Amos name brand that he created. He'd go on to create Uncle No Name's low-fat and fat-free muffins in 1992, which struggled until 1999 when Keebler allowed him to use Uncle Wally. He also agreed to promote Famous Amos again for an undisclosed fee, after making Keebler change the recipe. He said, somehow or another, caramel coloring had been added, and I don't know why that was. And they were using a real low-grade vanilla flavoring, and I always use vanilla extract. One of the first things I shared with Keebler when we met was that I couldn't promote the product they were currently selling. We had to make some adjustments so that it could be closer to a Wally Amos product. Throughout his business endeavors, Amos was also a pro-literacy advocate and prolific author. While the word catering wouldn't enter the American lexicon until the 1860s, the act itself had been around since at least 1778, when a British Army officer held an event in Philadelphia. The caterers were black, and an industry dominated by black men would dawn by the 1820s. This is true for numerous northern regions where there were no enslaved, but let's focus on the city of brotherly love. For families who couldn't employ full-time help, they hired private butlers who worked for multiple families. One such private butler was Robert Bogle, owner of the posh eatery Bluebell Tavern, which offered food for celebrations and funerals. He had such delicious spreads that a poem by Nicholas Biddle read, "If, service finished, cakes and wine were given by any hand but thine, and Christian burial e'en were scant, unless his aid the Bogle grant." Basically, if you were elite, you really needed Bogle for weddings, christenings, and funerals. The Philadelphia Inquirer explained what a lavish Bogle menu would look like. Turtle soup, a selection of fish, probably including salmon and trout, garnished with fried oysters, several main course meats including ham, saddle of mutton, served with hothouse peas and hominy, a selection of game including venison cutlets, quail and pheasant, salad with cheese and biscuits, a selection of mousses, puddings served with cookies, dried fruit and nuts, and port and Madeira served with the inevitable cigar. Plus, of course, 5 or 6 different wines. These menus, filled with European dishes, were meant to impress white people and establish a caterer's reputation. Bogle was known to be deferential to employers but a real tyrant to his own people, and he trained other black men like Thomas Dorsey. When Dorsey ran away with 3 brothers from his Baltimore enslaver in 1836, they made several friends in Philadelphia before being captured and sent back. His Philly friends paid for his freedom, and he returned in the 1830s and was a caterer by 1860 or 1862, serving up deviled crabs, lobster salad, chicken croquette, and other delicacies that made him wealthy enough to co-found the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society and aid fellow abolitionists like John Brown. Peter Albert Dutrieu, one of the many Haitians who fled in the aftermath of the Revolution, established a restaurant and catering business known for cream terrapin and oyster fritters. One of his innovations was providing chairs, linens, and other service items to the wealthy families who could afford catering. By the end of the century, black Philadelphians lost their monopoly on catering to white men and were being erased. Wrote D.M. Pilgrim, "The Centennial World's Fair, held in Philadelphia in 1876, contained no eating venues owned and operated by African American caterers and restaurateurs, even though they had garnered fame for the city. Instead, black men served as waiters at a host of other eateries on the fairgrounds. Still, black caterers and restaurateurs would endeavor on." By the way, caterers had been in other cities too, like Sally and Eliza Seymour in Charleston, South Carolina, the latter of whom operated out of this home, and Nat Fuller, whose food got him freed from slavery, a catering business, and eventually a restaurant called Bachelor's Retreat in 1860. He served white people during the chaos of the Civil War, advertising in 1861, "All gentlemen, whether over or under 45, are liable to find a good dinner and lunch at the Bachelor's Retreat. The bill of fare Tuesday includes oyster and calf head soups, turkey, wild duck, roast beef, a la mode beef, roast lamb, chicken pie, oyster pie, vegetables, and dessert courses." Nat was also great at mixing beverages. The Daily Constitutionalist of Augusta, Georgia, said, "Nat Fuller, the renowned presiding genius over many a fine dinner and supper, has a cunning way of fixing up water so as to take all the bad taste out of it. We do not get the exact receipt, but believe that ice, brandy, mint, and sugar are some of the condiments used." So across the country, catering was important. Explained the Low Country Digital History Initiative, "These men and women had the training and skills to cook for large numbers, manage books to minimize costs, transport china, silver, tables, linen, tents, and foodstuffs, hire reliable waitstaff and cooking assistants, contract for entertainment, and speak eloquently at major gatherings."
I would never eat a plate that looked like this. You couldn't even pay me $1 million to do that to myself. Oh my God. And I deserve better than that. That's low vibration. And you took it. I would have been like, I'm playing like that. I said, who's royalty? They would say this person. I agree. That's a good grab.
What constitutes a classy meal is a recurring theme in food history and this video. In The Origins of Soul Food and Black Urban Identity, Chicago, 1915 to 1947, Tracy Poe traced how black arrivals to the Windy City during the Great Migration were looked down upon for their food habits. She wrote, "The defenders' middle-class prejudices were often demonstrated in discussions of food. Feature articles such as one entitled Pig Ankle Joints railed against the unsightly, unsanitary eating places and wagons which catered to the migrant class's desire for familiar, down-home food." As documented by Ann L. Bauer, the National Council of Negro Women published its first fundraising cookbook in 1958. The thick historical tome, according to Bauer, eliminates a group of foods long part of African American cookery: pig feet, pigtails, and chitlins, which only appear as a minor optional ingredient for a Creole gumbo. Evidently, backyard barbecues, chitlins, and certain other items didn't fit into the middle-class lifestyle the NCNWE cookbook creators valued. Thankfully, there were a slew of other cookbooks that preserved historical recipes, many of them cataloged in the wonderful The Jemima Code, 2 Centuries of African American Cookbooks by Toni Tipton Martin. Additionally, as for Chicago, the middle class eventually got over their anti-soul food prejudice, and one of the earliest successful restaurants was the Soul Queen restaurant, wrote the Chicago Tribune in 1997. In the summer of 1947, Helen and Hubert Anglin opened the H&H Cafe at 125th East 51st Street. The cramped storefront, which only had 7 stools, became so popular that they were forced to enlarge it 3 times before they moved on to the spacious 22nd Street location. Just about everyone, including heavyweight boxing champion Joe Louis, came through H&H Cafe to dine on biscuits, brain and eggs, and pork chops with eggs. Helen Anglin eventually opened the Soul Queen restaurant buffet, serving fried chicken and barbecued ribs, red beans and rice and collard greens, and peach cobbler and banana pudding to everybody from the mayor, Harold Washington, to Nelson Mandela. A sign hung above the buffet saying, "You must eat all you take. Meat left on your plate will add $1. Vegetables left on your plate will add 75 cents. Oh, they strict around here. Like with food, the creation of beer, wine, and liquor could lead not just to financial freedom, but actual freedom. In 1808, 16-year-old Patsy Young escaped enslavement and kept herself afloat in North Carolina by brewing beer. In the 1850s, Tennessee preacher, grocer, and distiller Dan Call enslaved a man named Nathan Nearest Green, whose son is likely pictured here. When slavery was over, Nathan Nearest continued to work at Call's distillery, where, according to oral history, he taught an 8-year-old Jack Daniel how to make whiskey. Call introduced Uncle Nearest as the best whiskey maker that I know of. This part of the story, while passed down in oral tradition around Lynchburg, Tennessee, was omitted from the company's official narrative until 2016. Whiskey itself would be advertised by numerous companies with racist imagery, and it developed a negative connotation in the black community. As for Nathan, his descendant, Yvette J. Green, recounted in an essay for Salon that he had at least 9 children with his wife, Harriet Lou, and earned a living as a farmer. The Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey brand was founded in 2017 by Fawn Weaver. It became the fastest growing brand of whiskey in the world and won multiple awards. Said Weaver, "In 20 years, I want to be able to go anywhere in the world and say the name Nearest Green, and people know he was the first African-American master distiller on record in the United States, and helped perfect the process that takes an American bourbon and turns it into Tennessee whiskey." Here's Fawn and Nathan's descendants. In the 30s, Zora Neale Hurston tasted Coon Dick, or bootleg moonshine, in Florida, noted to be made of grapefruit juice, cornmeal mash, beef bones, and a few more things. If you can't tell from that recipe, it wasn't pleasant, and she'd write, "The raw liquor was too much. The minute it touched my lips, the top of my head flew off. I spat it out and ate some peanuts." In the 1960s, cognac brand Hennessy became one of the first to advertise directly to black Americans in the pages of Ebony and Jet magazines, and they became the first corporate sponsor of the NAACP. Why? They noticed that black veterans who had served in Europe preferred cognac over whiskey, which again had a racist connotation. A cultural affinity was cultivated, and yak, namely Hennessy, was locked in. You can learn a bunch about black people and beverages in Toni Tipton Martin's amazing book, Juke Joints, Jazz Clubs, and Juice. Edna Lewis was born in 1916 in Freetown, Virginia, the granddaughter of one of the town's founders, Chester Lewis. With most of her family being farmers, Edna decided early that a vegetable grown in an open field never tastes as good as one grown in a small garden. Fast forward to the 40s. Edna is living in New York as a seamstress or prop stylist, depending on the source, and she once made or styled a dress for Marilyn Monroe, plus she was a communist organizer. But she also threw dinner parties for friends that led to a job as a head chef at Cafe Nicholson in 1949, a bohemian and creative hangout. Over Lewis's roasted chicken with herbs and chocolate souffle described as light as a dandelion seed in the wind, diners like Truman Capote, Rita Hayworth, and William Faulkner would pontificate and socialize. After 5 years, Miss Lewis moved on to pheasant farming and catering, and later issued cookbooks, the most popular being 1975's Taste of Country Cooking. It featured recipes evocative of Miss Lewis's childhood, like beef a la mode, first cabbage of the season with scallions, hot buttered beets, pearl muffins and biscuits, and spiced pears. She preferred pan-fried chicken to deep-fried. At the time, she was working as a teaching assistant at the African Hall in the American Museum of Natural History. The cookbook renewed her cooking career, and she was invited to cook at trendy restaurants. She proudly recalled serving roast pork to James Beard and Julia Child at Hubert's, a French bistro. In fact, in 1976, James Beard raved about her cookbook and was startled to realize the Edna who wrote the cookbook was the same Edna who served marvelous food at a small, intimate New York restaurant many years ago, assumedly at Cafe Nicholson. In the 80s, Miss Lewis was the chef at Farrington House Inn in Pittsboro, North Carolina, which Aaron Hutcherson said still has her chocolate souffle on the menu. In 1988, an article showcased her delight that quality fresh vegetables were being offered in New York at the Union Square Green Market. Known as the Julia Child of the South, Miss Lewis was profiled by the Washington Post in 1990, saying, "What Lewis remembers from growing up in Freetown, Virginia is freshly churned butter and home-rendered lard, eel or catfish snatched from a nearby stream, wild greens, berries and nuts, foraged from the fields and woods, fruits plucked from a tree in the front yard and eaten on the walk back to the house. There was always food for friends or travelers who stopped by, maybe a slice of freshly baked pound cake. There were always lively discussions around the dinner table and big meals, prepared in the days when a man wouldn't marry a woman unless she was a good cook." At the time of that article, she was 74 years old and working 6 days a week from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. at the historic Gage and Tollner in New York, a restaurant that had refused black people service until 1960. She was credited with reviving the restaurant with her dishes, including she crab soup, crab cakes, and barbecue ribs. Edna's influence on the culinary world would resurface in 2017 when most competitors on an episode of Top Chef didn't know how to make a dish that reflected her. As a result of that airing, her 1975 cookbook promptly entered the bestsellers list. In November 2022, the Orange County Office of Tourism in Virginia launched the Edna Lewis Menu Trail, showcasing restaurants featuring her recipes like this delicious-looking apple brown Betty at Gordonsville Ice House in Gordonsville, Virginia. Oh my God, y'all, I need this so bad in my life. I'm gonna take this recipe and I'm gonna make this. This one right here, oh. Glazing right over thousands of years of cultivation of African soil, as well as the forced maintenance of slavery's cash crops like rice in South Carolina, and the continued subservience that existed during sharecropping, the black farmer has long been important to black American foodways. If you lived in rural areas, you had a garden for sustenance farming at the very least, and you likely wanted to capitalize. The Colored Farmers Alliance had over 1 million members by 1891. As time went on and land was squeezed from black landowners, the number of black farmers who could compete with large-scale farms and mechanized agriculture dwindled. By 1920, 218,612, or 24% of the nation's farms, were black operated, but only 1% were actually owned by black people. For most of the 20th century, they found it close to impossible to secure loans and aid from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Additionally, between 1920 and 1997, black farmers lost approximately $326 billion in land from heir property rules when an owner dies without a will in place. Every descendant of a farmer without a will got a cut of the land, explained Archie Creech. Greedy developers find one member of the family, perhaps someone who had long since left the land, living in a faraway state, and say, for that 1/40th a share, we'll give you $2,500. For that distant family member, a stranger cousin, as they are often called, with no connection to the land, this might seem like a no-brainer. But just like that, the rest of the family has lost control of the land. In 1995, the National Black Farmers Association was established by John Boyd, leading to a class action lawsuit, Pigford Vs Glickman, in 1997, alleging systemic discrimination by the USDA. At the center of the suit was North Carolina farmer Timothy Pigford, who was denied by the USDA multiple times the ability to buy the farm he worked as a tenant. With over 400 black plaintiffs joining the lawsuit, the government agreed to a $1 billion settlement in 1999. 40% of the 22,100 farmers applying for a $50,000 settlement were denied. Of the 173 farmers who filed for larger sums that would be litigated under hearing, only 18 won compensation. An additional 72,000 claims weren't reviewed.
While some applicants received a flat $50,000 tax-free payment, the vast majority never received a dime from the federal government. An overwhelming number of farmers were dubbed late filers by USDA when their applications trickled into office inboxes after a 180-day deadline. Tens of thousands of black farmers claim they did not receive proper notification of the settlement and that an independent USDA monitor failed to judge their applications on the merits of their claims. Government officials say they did more than enough to notify farmers, running ads in over 60 newspapers and airing 2 weeks of television commercials and radio announcements. But when Market to Market caught up with National Black Farmers President John Boyd at his group's annual conference in Dallas, he blasted that defense.
A lot of these people are not reading those publications. They'll say, hey, can you help me fill this out? They're not going to come up to you and tell you, man, I can't read and write.
In 2010, a second settlement for $1.25 billion was issued when it was reported that 60% of the black farmers had been denied. Black farmers are now less than 2% of the landowners in the United States and own less than 3 million acres. In the modern era, a number of black farming initiatives have launched to raise awareness about community gardens, black farming, and co-ops improving black businesses and health, known as Black Food Sovereignty, which leads us to black grocery stores. Depending on how you define grocery store, there have been black-owned ones for years. In 1889, in the Curve neighborhood of Memphis, black residents had two choices for groceries, where items were weighed out and fetched by an attendant, and trust was pretty imperative. The two options were the white-owned one by William Barrett and the People's Grocery, co-owned by various black investors, including Ida B. Wells's friend Thomas Moss. The People's Grocery was so successful that on March 9, 1892, a lynch mob burned down the store and killed Thomas Moss and two others, accusing them of plotting against white people. This began Ida's anti-lynching crusade and demonstrated white people's inability to cope with black success. In the 20th century, grocery stores became more numerous with the advent of mass canning and prepackaged goods in the 20s, and the self-service model emerged after the 1917 creation of Piggly Wiggly in Memphis. Booker T. Washington's Negro Business League created the Colored Merchants Association to serve as a co-op for black grocers in 1927. There were 253 black-owned stores by 1930 that attempted to hold off major chain store dominance. And in the decades that followed, co-ops would be associated with communism. While a number of small groceries that teetered on convenience existed, like this building called the Little Booker Store in Charlotte, North Carolina's Washington Heights neighborhood, there were no big chains apart from Nation of Islam's Your Supermarket and very few bona fide supermarkets. In 1968, Reverend Thornton Jones opened the Ebony Food Market in Syracuse, New York. It was leased and franchised by PNC Food Markets and described as fairly successful, offering the regular PNC stuff along with 60 soul food items to entice both black and white customers. However, after starting a push for a co-op in 1970, something changed, wrote Jonathan Croyle. It could not overcome frequent vandalism and thefts. The store had been broken into 5 times in the months before its closure, and considerable expenses had been paid to fixing its windows. I wonder who did that and why. The store closed in 1972, lasting much shorter than another Syracuse black-owned grocery, William Bros Grocers, which opened in 1913 and lasted until 1944. In Detroit, James Hook started working at a Kroger in 1969 before buying it in 1984 and turning it into Metro Foodland. While it initially served as a crucial lifeline for Detroit's black middle class, the eventual arrival of outside bad competitors hurt sales. And like other black groceries, it had to fight off accusations of being dirty. A campaign to save the store began in 2012, which led to an increase in Nation of Islam customers. Reported the Detroit Metro Times, soon men with bow ties and impeccable manners were seen shopping the aisles. Hooks reciprocated by stocking the shelves with the nectars and organic foods members told him they wanted. He's even adding halal meat as well to meet the sudden surge in demand. Unfortunately, the push to save Metro Foodland was futile, and the company shuttered. Around the same time, a black farmer named Malik Yakini was trying to encourage his community to invest in a co-op, supplementing a business grant and federal funding. Said Tyrion Morrow in 2024, 7 years ago, Malik Yakini did this whole spiel about all his plans for building this grocery store. He was asking for people to become member owners of something that did not exist, that we had no concept of, but it was going to be a real thing that was going to be in the city. Thanks to over 14 years of hard work, he rallied 2,600 Michigan residents, mostly black, to put down a $200 membership for the Detroit People's Food Co-op.
Malik Yakini spoke with Fox 2 about that need a couple of years ago.
People are interested in what we can do ourselves on a community level to begin to at least provide some of the food that we consume.
And now it's becoming a reality. Construction on the site at Woodward Avenue in Euclid will start next week, and it's expected to take about a year. The new grocery store will also have incubator kitchens for local bakers and chefs, as well as banquet space.
In a neighborhood longing for access to nutritious foods, customers and staff couldn't contain their excitement as the doors finally opened Wednesday at Detroit People's Food Co-op.
We needed something healthy in our neighborhood instead of eating just anything.
Terry Jackson was among the first to check out the fresh produce, the bulk items, the deli, and the aisles of high-quality food that make up the 15,000-square-foot grocery store.
Membership grants a vote in board representation and eligibility for profits during profitable years. Everything he said is what is, except for the member ownership. It's actually cheaper than he said they would be. Also in Detroit in 2023, a retired nurse named Sonia Green made headlines when she turned a liquor store into a grocery store in an attempt to reverse the ongoing harm of food deserts in her community.
A lot of the neighborhoods long ago used to have grocery stores, and to bring that back and give everyone access to it is important.
The 1,800 square foot building was once a liquor store.
Fresh fruits and vegetables, exactly what we need. Not someone saying they're going to do it, but doing it and getting it done. I love it.
More than just a grocery store, Linwood Fresh Market represents new opportunities for entrepreneurs across Detroit.
Have you ever went over to a friend's house to eat and the food just ain't no good? I mean, the macaroni's soggy, the peas are mushed, and the chicken tastes like wood. Rapped Wonder Mike in Rapper's Delight. If you're a connoisseur of black literature, you know that food and storytelling and imagery is quite common. And because hip-hop is the extension of the black literary tradition, it's no surprise how important food is to hip-hop. Of course, there's the slang. In Aquemeni Andre 3000 rapped, street scholars majoring in culinary arts, you know how to work bread, cheese, and dough. Food also conveys a lack of funds, whether you're Biggie eating sardines for dinner or every motherfucking night I was eating cheese eggs like Megan Thee Stallion. With cash flow comes Grey Poupon, lobster, caviar, bowls of ziti, and name-dropping expensive restaurants like Mr. Chow's, Tao, and Nobu. Restaurants also convey hometown pride, from Beyonce name-dropping Frenchies to Southerners and Papado and Waffle House, and any number of West Coast rappers dropping Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles and Atlanta-based musicians shouting out the wings at Magic City. I can't decide which female rapper loves food more out of Lotto and Doja Cat, and Sweetie loves her creative food combos, which made her prime for endorsement deals like a bunch of other rappers. Hip-hop is arguably one of McDonald's biggest marketing tools, and there's a lot of delicious food metaphors for sex, which we discuss in this video. But the food scene extends past lyrics. In 1994, James Lindsay used $40,000 raised from friends and family to start Rap Snacks, using the flavors Barbecuing with My Honey and Back at the Ranch. One of the first rappers to become involved was Master P. My grandfather used to carry these in his convenience stores in Charlotte, North Carolina before they caught on for real, and they'd have musicians like Lil Romeo, Belle Biv DeVoe, and Warren G. In 1997, the same year that Cooking Light decreed that soul food was the cuisine to watch, Diddy launched Justin's. The New Yorker described it thusly: "The crowd sometimes mistakes the place for a late-night club, and it shows. The fried chicken plate with a side of mac and cheese is delicious, and so is P. Diddy's jumbo fried shrimp, which one waiter referred to as the puffy shrimp." This was just the beginning of hip-hop destination establishments that added to the legitimacy of problematic moguls like Diddy, who also extended their brands to being ambassadors for top-shelf alcohol. Ludacris turned his platinum-selling fourth album, Chicken and Beer, featuring my favorite song, Splash Waterfalls, into an Atlanta airport-based restaurant with chicken and waffles and all other kind of chicken and beer options. Other rappers have entered the world of franchising, like Rick Ross and Wingstop. Plus, there are rappers who got into vlogging and cookbooks like Coolio and the Ghetto Gourmet, and Snoop Dogg's From Crook to Cook. It makes sense that as a stoner he would have a cookbook. Khalees went from Tasty and Milkshake to food and farming, eventually graduating from Le Cordon Bleu. Sauce is her specialty, and she explained it's what accessories are to a woman's outfit. Sauce defines where the dish is from and who's making it. I think everything is better smothered, poured, or dipped. Lastly, for the hip-hop segment, I'll leave you with Gucci Mane's Ice Cream Tattoo and the Wu-Tang song, Ice Cream, which makes me hungry every time I hear French Vanilla Butter Pecan Chocolate Deluxe, which leads us to I.
What you want? What you got? Boy, what the fuck you want?
The ice cream man is coming! The ice cream man is coming! Ma!
Sallie Shadd, a caterer in Wilmington, Delaware, whipped up a popular cream, sugar, and fruit confection in the early 19th century. Dolly Madison, James Madison's wife, traveled to Wilmington just to taste it, and it was on the menu at Madison's second inauguration ball in 1813. Norbert Rilo revolutionized the refinement of sugar, making the process faster and cheaper and available for all that good ice cream. And then there's Frederick McKinley Jones, whose 40 of 61 patents were regarding mobile refrigeration technology, including the Thermo King, which made it possible for perishable items, including ice cream, to be shipped for longer periods of time. In 1838 Philadelphia, there were 5 black confectioners, including one Augustus Jackson, who sold his flavors for $1 a quart. According to local legend, he popularized the use of salt on ice cream and was nicknamed the father of ice cream, though he didn't invent it. Lastly, Alfred L. Krall patented the ice cream scooper in 1896. Despite contributions to the world of ice cream, for a period of American history, it was common legend that a certain flavor was off limits. Wrote Maya Angelou in I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, "People in Stamps used to say that the whites in our town were so prejudiced that a Negro couldn't buy vanilla ice cream, except on July 4th. Other days, he had to be satisfied with chocolate." Butter pecan was supposedly a popular alternative, and even while the veracity of banned vanilla is debated, its strength as urban legend reflects historic prejudice and discrimination. If you've always heard vanilla ice cream was off limits, especially in small towns, testing that limit might not end well. Also, we can't leave this segment without shouting out Malcolm X, who was a fan of ice cream. Malcolm even defied urban legend by eating vanilla ice cream with Jim Brown, Sam Cooke, and freshly minted heavyweight champion Cassius Clay in a Miami hotel room in 1964, where they discussed politics. The next day, Cassius would announce he was Muslim, becoming Muhammad Ali. In 1889, pancake flour entrepreneur Chris Rutt heard blackface vaudeville performers sing a song called Aunt Jemima. He made this the name of his pancake mix. In 1890, the new owner of the formula commissioned 56-year-old former enslaved woman Nancy Green as the spokesperson of Aunt Jemima pancakes. Nancy made her debut at the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago and was a smash hit. The 59-year-old Green would spend the next 20 years appearing in the role at stores and fairs, serving approximately 1 million pancakes and generating thousands of sales. She died in poverty after being struck by a car in 1923. Wrote Maurice M. Manring in Slave in a Box, The Strange Career of Aunt Jemima, a real living black woman instead of a white man in blackface and drag would reinforce the product's authenticity and origin as the creation of a real ex-slave. Aunt Jemima was a part of a larger nostalgia advertising trend of appealing to white desires to return to the old status quo. Aunt Jemima's kind and cheerful face was slapped on merchandise and advertisements that perpetuated the stereotype of the mammy, who adored taking care of white people during slavery. When Quaker Oats took over in 1926, they used multiple black women in various markets, including Agnes Moody and Lillian Richard. Another debut at the 1893 World's Fair was Cream of Wheat, which featured the character Rastus, which was a slur for black men. The dumb Rastus was a recurring stock character in minstrel shows, so the selection for Cream of Wheat was deliberate. Later in the 20th century, the company switched to a supposed picture of a Chicago chef named Frank L. White. According to an ad executive, "I noticed particularly 2 colored waiters who had unusually winning smiles. I then offered each of them 50 cents if they would go down to Copland Studio, which was only a few doors away, and have their pictures taken. This impressed them as a great joke, but they willingly consented. I had about a dozen pictures taken, and the one which I liked best showed the Negro with 1 tooth missing. So I arranged to have the photographer retouch the photo. That marked the birth of the new Rastus, now so well known to the American public." Before Uncle Ben and Spider-Man, there was Uncle Ben's Rice by the Mars Food Company, first hitting the shelves with the Bow Tie Gentleman in 1946. Executives would claim that Uncle Ben was based off of a real rice grower, as if using somebody's likeness without payment was better. And in 2007, Uncle Ben spent $20 million to rebrand Uncle Ben into an executive, with the New York Times describing an accomplished businessman with an opulent office, a busy schedule, an extensive travel itinerary, and a penchant for sharing what the company calls his grains of wisdom about rice and life. In 2020, in the aftermath of market-wide panic in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, all 3 companies rebranded. When Ebony magazine began operating out of the new Johnson Publishing Company headquarters in Chicago in 1972, it featured a full spread showing off its new home at 820 South Michigan Avenue. The test kitchen was the envy of the building though, which is hard because the entire building was beautiful. Just check out John Johnson's executive suite and bathroom. Like, oh my God, that's nice. If I was alive in the 60s, it would have been my destiny to work in this building. But let's stay on topic. Recipes had been in the magazine since 1946 as Date with a Dish, but now things like cherry pompadour pie were whipped up in this funky and groovy space on the 10th floor, which was also home to the Ebony employee cafeteria. It was the 3rd such kitchen for the magazine, but this one was all electric, featuring a trash compactor, a 4-slot toaster built into the wall, a built-in can opener, an inset microwave, and a refrigerator that had an ice and water dispenser. Ebony's first food editor was Frida DeKnight, who was the first black food editor in the country. She put directions as captions for the magazine's photos, which was extremely popular and innovative.
A leading home economist is Mrs. Frida DeKnight of Ebony magazine. Her popular articles on food and home furnishings and her book, A Date with a Dish, have won international honor. A large portion of Mrs. DeKnight's time is spent in the Ebony test kitchen. In reality, it is an informal laboratory where each recipe to be published is tested under home cooking conditions. Special attention is given to weight and texture as well as appearance, and only perfection rates the DeKnight stamp of approval.
DeKnight published 1948's A Date with a Dish, the Ebony Cookbook. It included thousands of recipes from regular people, celebrities, and foodies, and multiple versions of different dishes, like 15 recipes for cornbread. DeKnight wrote, "It is a fallacy, long disproved, that Negro cooks, chefs, caterers, and homemakers can adapt themselves only to the standard Southern dishes, such as fried chicken, greens, corn pone, and hot breads. Like other Americans living in various sections sections of the country, they have naturally shown a desire to become versatile in the preparation of any dish, whether it is Spanish, Italian, French, Balinese, or East Indian in origin. So there were ethnic dishes like those, plus regional specialties like banana orange caramel cake, which Donna Battle Pierce made here, and tamale pie, a New Orleans po' boys recipe offered up by 2 graduates of Xavier University, Charlie Saunders' hot water cornbread in the Collector's Corner, and all of these were only available in the 1948 edition. The book was reissued as the Ebony Cookbook in 1962, with 416 recipe-packed pages. Another food editor, Charlotte Draper, launched Your Favorite Recipe column, testing readers' recipes and letting employees taste and vote, while she was working at Ebony from 1982 to 1984. Per the landmark Illinois, taste testers would fill out an evaluation, eat a soda cracker to cleanse their palate, and return to the counter for the next recipe. The winning reader recipe would be featured in the magazine and receive a $25 cash prize. Draper specifically recalls a delicious sweet potato pie recipe that was a personal favorite from this column. The next to fill this role was Charlotte Lyons, who served as food editor between 1985 and 2010. She said that everybody from employees to visiting celebrities were always hanging out. Ebony never upgraded or changed the design of the kitchen, only replacing the refrigerator once in its history. After Ebony folded and the building was sold, the test kitchen was saved from demolition, dismantled piece by piece in one weekend, and displayed in the Museum of Food and Drink before being relocated to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Would Betty Shabazz have married Malcolm X and given up being a Methodist if the food at the Harlem Nation of Islam temple wasn't bussin'? As we discussed in a buffet of black food history, the controversial group was well regarded for its health food and street hawk bean pies, along with Elijah Muhammad's book, How to Eat to Live. When a nurse friend took Betty to a meeting in 1956, the food reeled Betty in. She'd say in a 1993 interview, "I certainly thought it was interesting because I had been eating institutional food for a great number of years. I'm in New York and I certainly wanted to go back to her house to have dinner." She told Essence the year before, "The food was delicious. I'd never tasted food like that." So the friend took her to another meeting with food, promising that a handsome young pastor all the girls were crushing on would be speaking. Big deal, she thought. She was there for the food. But Betty stuck around, and the rest is history. The New Orleans-born self-proclaimed fish and bread gospel singer Mahalia Jackson made her name by performing at revivals and churches, eventually becoming the first gospel artist to sign with Columbia Records. In the late 60s, Kentucky Fried Chicken was growing in popularity. While Colonel Sanders' secret recipe was a remix of black female waiter carriers hawking chicken to travelers at train stations during Reconstruction, others wanted in on the market. The success of comedian Minnie Pearl's name and likeness on a chain of chicken restaurants led to Mahalia getting her own deal for Glorified Chicken. Claimed the Chicago Defender, the fried chicken chain uses Miss Jackson's own recipes and features glorified chicken, tender tasty catfish, sweet potato pie, and golden Jubilee biscuits. The company was half owned by whites, and the president of operations was former criminal court judge Benjamin Hooks. At the December 7, 1968 Memphis grand opening, Jackson gave out a free album to each person who bought a bucket of chicken or catfish, and there was even a TV giveaway. At the time, the ideological divide between the Black Power movement and black capitalism was growing deeper. For Hooks, Mahalia Jackson's Fried Chicken was a direct attempt to compete against white-owned chicken restaurants and grow community wealth. And there was even a rule that white people couldn't franchise unless there was a black partner who owned over 50% of the business. Said Ben Hooks, "White liberals will pay $1,000 to be scared to death by somebody like Stokely Carmichael or Eldridge Cleaver, but they can't get interested in something like this." Hooks, who would go on to be the executive director of the NAACP, must have been referring to the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program, which started in 1969 and lasted until 1980, in spite of government interference. The takeout restaurants popped up in Tallahassee, Cleveland, and Detroit, but a robbery at the Charlotte, North Carolina location didn't help its reputation. Mahalia's prices were low. For instance, a 9-piece chicken, mashed potato, gravy, slaw, and biscuits dinner was $3.40 45 cents, and a soul bowl, or chicken giblets over rice, was 65 cents. But they couldn't compete with KFC. Claimed Hooks, who would be the first black person appointed to the FCC by Nixon, he saw long-haired brothers with their hands up in a black power salute, shuffling right on to Colonel Sanders. The restaurants would close between 1971 and 1972, but not before the Tallahassee location sponsored an all-black softball team in 1972, made up of 20 women living in the Orange Avenue projects. Their name? Mahalia's Chickens. As for Mahalia Jackson herself, her 1970 cookbook showcased her New Orleans roots and ties to West Indian culture, listing recipes for peas and rice, Jamaican fried plantain, Nigerian groundnut stew, shrimp creole, and oven beef burgundy. Her name and likeness would also be used for a short period on canned vegetables and condiments, telling customers to put a Southern accent in your cooking. So in the past, we've discussed the delicious menus of early to mid-20th century Harlem rent parties that fuse black Southern foods with recent immigrant favorites from the Caribbean, but let's examine the soul food scene of New York more closely. In 1969, Bergdorf Goodman held a charity fashion show called Basic Black for the Harlem Northside Children's Center that was catered with soul food, including chitlins and champagne. Said a chairwoman quoted as Mrs. Charles Taylor, "It's all very in and chic to be eating soul food here at Bergdorf's, but we should remember that this once was the only food poor blacks had, and it didn't used to be all that good." The city's soul food culture was flourishing. In 1962, South Carolina-born Sylvia Woods and her husband Herbert founded Sylvia's in Harlem. The space had formerly been Johnson's Luncheonette, which Sylvia had worked at as a waitress for a number of years before buying it for $20,000. Originally encompassing 8 counter stools and 4 tables, the earliest menu featured breakfast like biscuits and gravy, but more customers and longer hours meant a bigger menu. Described Osaka Endelin, "I knew that the food we only ever had at Thanksgiving and Christmas was available all the time, and that the same faces I saw in the pages of Essence and Ebony magazines on our coffee table could be spotted at Sylvia's, sometimes together." Early fans of the restaurant included James Brown and Roberta Flack, the latter of whom said her favorite meal was grilled chicken liver with tons of grilled onions and scrambled eggs, medium. Oh yeah. A 1979 article by New York Magazine food critic Gail Green brought a new clientele. Wrote Green, despite criticizing the okra and black-eyed peas, "It's an adventure, it's a lark, the grits are a must, they are impeccable, smooth and full of the nutty hominy flavor, and the ribs, moist and sassy." People flocked to the tiny restaurant, and Sylvia's expanded into next door, eventually being in Spike Lee's Jungle Fever and becoming known for its Sunday gospel brunch, open mic nights, live jazz, and line of soul food products. There were even brief entries into the Atlanta market in the 90s, but its true value was in being a beacon of soul food in New York City. The restaurant re-entered headlines in 2007 when Bill O'Reilly ate there with Al Sharpton and claimed to be shocked that black people and businesses were normal. After dining on the meatloaf special, coconut shrimp, and iced tea, he said, "It was like going into an Italian restaurant in an all-white suburb in the sense of people were sitting there and they were ordering and having fun and there wasn't any kind of craziness at all." Well, duh. Discussions of class and decorum in black restaurants are often tangled in what kind of food is being served. Take another New York one-time hotspot, B. Smith's. The former model B. Smith was a hostess at a restaurant named America in the 80s when she impressed the restaurant group owners so much that they decided to give her her own eatery, which she paired with cookbooks, entertaining guides, and a TV show, earning her the annoying nickname The Black Martha Stewart. Said Otis Graham, "She has given the black upper classes permission to come out of the closet. Everybody in our crowd really watches her show because we live like this. Until now, we felt as though we had to apologize for the fact that we had nice homes and nice things." While Sylvia's was seen as Southern and traditional, B. Smith's restaurants and brand was seen as innovative and classy soul food for middle-class black professionals. Described Jessica B. Harris, "The menu revived old Southern favorites like fried green tomatoes, crab cakes, macaroni and cheese, and mashed sweet potatoes, and it also gave a nod to Caribbean influences with pigeon peas and rice and fried plantain." They were served alongside dishes like curried coconut oysters with a coconut wasabi dip, and Swamp Thing, a hot of shrimp, scallops, and crayfish, napped with a Dijon mustard sauce and presented over a bed of greens. A New York Times article encouraged the restaurant's PR, writing about a slew of couples who met their mates over B. Smith's meals. All three couples are black, and the place where they met, B. Smith's restaurant at 47th Street and 8th Avenue, has emerged as one of New York City's principal meeting places for black professionals. Since it opened on November 2, 1986, 4 black couples who met there have married, including its owner. B. Smith would open 2 more restaurants in Sag Harbor and Washington, D.C.
You see the presidential seal up there? Today, it's the entrance to B. Smith's restaurant.
Now, ordinary citizens are free to gaze at the beauty and grandeur of this once exclusive space.
When I saw this location, it was like, oh my God, this is a fabulous space.
This room was modeled after the Oval Office.
And the historic space often attracts a prominent crowd.
We get folks from both sides of the aisle, congressmen and senators and presidents from time to time. I won't mention any names, but sometimes the opposite sides are sitting at the same table.
Described one paper, while Smith may have grown up eating collard greens from her own backyard, she now sautés them in olive oil and puts them in Italian frittatas. This reflected a shift in soul food in the 90s, especially in New York. Reported The Times in 1995, something has happened to soul food of late. The dishes are often fancier and sometimes healthier than the meals prepared by grandmas in sweltering southern kitchens or by cooks uptown at Sylvia's. Call it Nouveau Soul. This new wave of southern cooking was converging with efforts to honor pioneers like Edna Lewis. At Alexander Small's Cafe Beulah, described the paper, well-heeled neighborhood residents and luminaries like Naomi Campbell, Quincy Jones, Glenn Close, Bernadette Peters, and Toni Morrison, she's actually invested in the restaurant, sup on black-eyed pea and arugula salad with honey mustard dressing and sautéed chicken livers with peppered turnip greens and barbecue mustard sauce. The paper added, in traditional Southern cooking, collard greens are cooked for at least an hour, sometimes for 2 or 3, but not at Cafe Beulah, where Mr. Small sautés them in olive oil, garlic, and rosemary for a scant 10 minutes. Another Nouveau soul food restaurant opened by a former model, Tukey's, was health-focused. Tukey Smith, ex-partner of Robert De Niro, had gained weight in 1987 after the loss of her brother, the designer Willie Smith, to HIV/AIDS. Wrote The Times, imagine barbecued ribs without sugar or salt, or candied sweet potatoes with the barest sprinkle of brown sugar, biscuits without much butter. Added Hilton Owls for The New Yorker. Tukey's menu is one of the most autobiographical we have ever seen. Offerings include My Those Fries, Honey That House Salad, and Black Bottom Pie. Beulah's and Tukey's would be bested by places like Miss Mamie's Spoonbread 2, a continuation of former model Norma Jean Darden's Spoonbread Catering, which got its start supplying the actors and crew of The Cosby Show. A number of other expensive and fusion soul food eateries would pop up in the late 90s, inspiring the much-dreaded storyline in Sex and the City, in which Samantha Jones meets her unicorn black lover at his sister's restaurant and then insults her okra.
Get your little white pussy away from my brother!
Get your big black ass out of my face! Oh, and your okra wasn't all that!
During the Korean War of the mid-20th century, approximately 6.8 million Americans were in the military to help South Korea fight the North, and 600,000 of them were black. While fried chicken has existed worldwide for centuries, the modern extra crispy Korean fried chicken of today is believed to be an extension of recipes taught to Korean soldiers by black ones. If this is exaggerated, it demonstrates the close links between international foodways and cuisines. The Ebony woman how to make this delicious brown sugar and pecan candy, and she will nod her head mysteriously and give you an indefinite answer. For the secret is her own, and she does not intend to reveal it. The mystique of pralines began from a recipe brought from France into New Orleans. While the original French version was a combination of almonds and sugar, in the Crescent City, the almonds were swapped with pecans and splashed with cream. Because of the abundance of free pecans growing around New Orleans, praline were a low-cost business for the mostly black female street vendors who sold them. By 1918, a white-owned New Orleans company capitalized on this old Louisiana mammy confection, and pralines became common sweet shop treats featuring mammy stereotyping. In 1984, Loretta Harrison created the first black-owned praline company in New Orleans, Loretta's Authentic Pralines, after being a smash hit at Jazz Fest the previous year. At that festival, she sold 1,500 pralines for $1 a piece because the regular praline vendor dropped out. In her shop, she innovated with new flavors like chocolate, rum raisin, and peanut butter. Because I'm the one editing this video, it's on a strict time limit. And while I'd love to wax poetic about all of the amazing black-owned restaurants that have impacted their communities, here's a quick list of quality black-owned and historic regional dining that locals should drop a review on in the comments. There's the Four-Way in Memphis, opened by Irene and Clint Cleaves in 1946 to become one of the first integrated eateries in the city. Martin Luther King Jr. played pool here at least once. Thanks to being located close to the Memphis music scene and the Stax record label, the restaurant had regular orders from associated celebrities like Elvis, Red Fox, Aretha Franklin, Ike and Tina, and more, said Stax PR director Deanie Parker. We could plan to eat baked chicken and dressing with string beans and candy yams on Thursdays, fried fish and spaghetti on Fridays, and there was always a beef stew on Wednesdays. Their lemon icebox pie was the Godiva of Soulsville desserts. In 1950 in Chicago, Harold Pierce's chain of chicken shacks was limited to black neighborhoods because of redlining. After he opened his first, according to the Chicago Reader, the next few stores were trademark agreements with family and friends. He put $50 in their registers, told them where to get chicken from, and expected them to pay him a 42-cent royalty per bird. In the modern era, there are approximately 40 Harold chicken shacks across Chicago. Lois Davis opened Lois the Pie Queen in Oakland, California in 1949. The San Francisco Gate described the restaurant's lineup during its 50-year anniversary in 1999, saying salmon croquettes, biscuits and grits, and palate-pleasing pies, sweet potato, peach cobbler, pecan, lemon icebox, apple, little pleasure wedges topped by frothy dollops of whipped cream. Lois the Pie Queen would become a staple of Oakland. Up in Seattle, Ezell Stevens and Louis Rudd opened Ezell's Famous Chicken in 1984, bringing Southern-style food to Washington. The restaurant actually reached levels of fame when it became a caterer for the Seattle Seahawks and was name-dropped by Oprah Winfrey as her favorite chicken spot in 1989. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of drama and Ezell was squeezed out of the company and he went on to start Heaven Sent Chicken. After the death of a loved one in the Black American community, it is customary to gather for repast. During enslavement, funeral gatherings were initially discouraged, but over time they became one of the few social allowances on old plantations. Wrote Robin Caldwell, a benevolent enslaver would allow enslaved relatives and friends to visit for these occasions, so food was a matter of sustenance for traveling guests and also a form of fellowship. The rare enslaver provided extra food allotments such as meat, rice, cornmeal, and whiskey or rum. The foods prepared could include corn pone, sweetmeats, fried fish, and most likely pot meals, such as a stew or gumbo or a pepper pot, to accommodate a large volume of people. Nothing fancy, but it was plentiful and welcoming. Celebrating with food, stories, and communion were extensions of West African traditions. When slavery ended, funeral parlors and life insurance were crucial aspects of the Black economy and professional class, providing the means to bestow a loved one with an adequate homecoming and provide enough chicken, rolls, banana pudding, and cakes for mourners who trickled in and out to pay their respects. Previous Black food history video, we established the importance of oysters, especially in Maryland and New York. But what about a few other tasty seafood dishes? The fish fry, whether at church or a trusted restaurant, is beloved because you can fulfill your crispy seafood craving without making your house smell like it. Hey, should I go on a tangent about olfactory ethics or... According to Adrian Miller, the fish fry was linked to plantation downtime, saying the work schedule on the plantation would slow down by noon noon on Saturday. So enslaved people had the rest of the day to do what they wanted. So the fish fry started as a Saturday night thing on plantations. And it was like an impromptu get-together. Miller also suggested that after slavery, as black people moved to cities and encountered Catholics who ate fish on Friday and therefore had fish sales on those days, the fish fry was regularly rescheduled to Friday. Zora Neale Hurston noted prejudices regarding fried fish in Florida, writing that well-mannered Negroes didn't like seeing poor blacks with their shoes off, stuffing themselves with fried fish. In St. Michael's, Maryland, crab grading was established by seafood packing company co-owner Frederick Jewett. He and William Colburn created the company in 1902 and made big bucks on blue crabs, grading them into colossal lump, claw, jumbo lump, back fin, etc. to create exclusivity and premium prices and stroke demand. In the early 20th century, Colburn and Jewett Seafood Packing Company was the largest employer in St. Michael's and the biggest black-owned business in the state. The seafood industry was major. The Baltimore Banner reported that in 1938, 600 workers, most of them black women, walked out of the crab picking houses in Crisfield, Maryland to protest bad wages. The workers made 25 cents per gallon of crab meat that they picked. And despite violence by white mobs searching for labor organizer Michael Howard, the strike lasted for 5 weeks, eventually leading to a recognition of the Crab Pickers Union and a 10-cent bump in pay. The only crab picking house in the area to skip the strike altogether and pay the workers more money to begin with, Colburn and Jewett. By the late 1930s, the company processed 1 million pounds of crab annually. But per the University of Maryland, overharvesting, high prices, and tougher government health rules impacted the Chesapeake region's seafood industry, and the company closed in the 60s. While modern American barbecue has its roots in indigenous barbacoa and African people, the latter of whom called cooking over an open pit babake, the practice would become synonymous with Southern foodways and be embroiled in politics. According to Adrian Miller, because cooking large whole animals was a labor-intensive job, black people essentially became part of the recipe. In his book, Black Smoke, he tracked how black pitmasters could travel and make a living putting on barbecues, leading to white men getting into the practice in the 1890s to cash in. At juke joints, barbecue was the preferred menu, where the best pitmasters cooked their meats for as long as 12 hours in a variety of sauces, the simplest involving salt, pepper, butter, and vinegar. Outside of business endeavors, noted Fred Opie, the idea of throwing a little something on the grill was often used with nefarious intent. At a turpentine plantation in Lewiston, Florida, workers from Arkansas were lured to the area for underpaid labor with promises of barbecues and weekly entertainments. He cited that planters and owners of turpentine camps forced black workers to the polls and voted them in gangs on election day. In some voting districts, employers held all-night election eve feasts where barbecue, beer, and whiskey by the barrel were served. Then on election day, they carefully guarded and marched those who attended the barbecue to the polls to ensure all voted for the desired candidate. And in Florida, Zora Neale Hurston noted that when people helped their neighbors build a new home, the new homeowner would throw a little something on the grill to thank their community. 8 months after the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination that rattled the country, the first black-owned McDonald's franchise opened in 1968 in Chicago by Herman Petty. Amidst a gang turf war and eateries and grocery stores fleeing the civil unrest, McDonald's was one of the few food places left on the South Side. Petty went on to co-establish the National Black McDonald's Operators Association with other franchisees in 1972. Marcia Chatelain pointed out that a number of McDonald's ended up in shuttered grocery stores, contributing to fresh food scarcity. These early black franchisees were much more involved with local community civic efforts than white-owned businesses. And as time went on, the McDonald's Corporation became much more philanthropic in local black communities, providing services that should have come from the government, not the private sector. Because the company's fast and questionable food was cheap, it performed well in majority black locations, providing more opportunities for black ownership and employment, though not always in equity with non-Black Americans. For better and for worse, the company retargeted much of its advertising to Black people and became a primary employer. With a loyal Black customer base, it could funnel money into lobbying against fair wages, health regulations, and more, which is discussed at length in Chatelain's book, Franchise: The Golden Arches in Black America. Vertime Smart Grosvenor noticed the link between African and Low Country cuisine early in her youth in Hampton County, South Carolina. As a member of the Gullah Geechee, Grosvenor experimented with cooking regularly, and in 1958, at 19, she moved to Paris to become a performer, but continued to be fascinated by food and culture. During her travels, she cooked for James Baldwin, David Bowie, Nina Simone, and Miles Davis. Vertime's 1970 book, Vibration Cooking, or The Travel Notes of a Geechee Girl, was part cookbook, part memoir. And not only did it influence food, but it preserved Gullah Geechee culture and influenced the burgeoning concept of food writing.
In talking earlier, you are the only Black culinary anthropologist. What is this? There must be.
I'm not only the only Black, there are no white culinary anthropologists. I am the only one in this country. I don't know about the rest of the world. I always find it presumptuous when people say the greatest actor in the world. I don't know. I just know that I'm the only one, white or Black, in this country. A culinary anthropologist is a person who researches and writes about, as an anthropologist, and I use food. I talk about foods, where they come from, how they affect our cultural life, how they affect our national life. Foods to me, like music, you know, and so I write about that.
Now,
I know all kinds of wonderful things about okras and watermelons and apples. And
that's what I was going to ask you about. Do you not only just write about food, but you write about specific kinds
where
of
it came from, how, you know, for instance, watermelon is an African fruit. Okra is native to the Nile Valley in Ethiopia.
With very few approximations, it wasn't a traditional cookbook. Vertime wrote, "And when I cook, I never measure or weigh anything. I cook by vibration. I can tell by the look and smell of it. Most of the ingredients in this book are approximate. Different strokes for different folks. Do your thing your way." For much of history's history, certain disciplines have been viewed as frivolous or unimportant, especially anything that's non-military and or Black. Thankfully, in the modern era, historiography has only grown more niche and thorough, thanks to the hard work of pioneering scholars. In Black food history, those include Jessica B. Harris, Michael Twitty, Toni Tipton Martin, Fred Opie, Adrian Miller, Tanya Hopkins, and others listed in this video's sources. I really admire their work, so I'm giving away a set of these books to one lucky US-based viewer. Comment, "I want the books," to be randomly entered into a drawing. The winner will be announced on February 28th, 2025. X is for Slutty Vegan, the restaurant that started in 2018 in Atlanta and quickly gained fame. Originally supposed to be a ghost kitchen, it was founded as a food truck by Clark Atlanta alum Pinky Cole. As it expanded into restaurants, it was distinguished for being a high-profile Black-owned vegan chain restaurant during a period in American history where Black people were re-examining their eating habits. It became a viral food with long 2 to 3 hour wait times. Fittingly, for the X-rated title, newbies to Slutty Vegan are called virgins and returning customers called sluts. Pinky Cole said, "I know that sex sells, so I thought, how I can positively manipulate this. We want you to have an orgasmic experience and the ultimate feeling of euphoria that comes after having a vegan burger." Relatedly, check out this video, A History of Food and Sex. In 1876, Alexander P. Ashburn secured a patent for a biscuit cutter to ensure the uniformity of biscuits and other pastries. He also patented a process for refining coconut oil in 1880. In 1892, Anna Magrin patented the pastry fork, so chefs could mix things without their hands. In 1895, Joseph Lee, a formerly enslaved restaurateur and baker in Boston, patented a breadcrumbing machine to make use of stale bread, plus a bread making machine. The mysterious California-born Madeline M. Turner made fruit juice much easier to make, with her 1916 patent for Turner Fruit Press, serving as the basis for the modern juice and smoothie industry. Thank goodness her name was Zora and not Shirley or Geraldine or something. Thanks to her, we have vast knowledge about the black foodways of Southern America. As documented by Fred Opie, the future anthropologist was born at the height of hog butchering season in Alabama. Women passed the crackling out to the workers along with pans of freshly baked cornbread, roasted sweet potatoes, and molasses. Over and above being neighborly and giving aid, there's the food, the drinks, and the fun of getting together. Zora loved chicken and even desired to start a food business where she would sell chicken bouillon, chicken salad, chicken a la king, fried chicken, and chicken soup, bragging in a letter, "I'm an expert at cooking chicken." One of my favorite Zora food revelations, though, is something called a toe party in Orange County, Florida. Yes, it's exactly what you think it is. A group of women hid behind a curtain, feet exposed, and men would come by and pick a pair of feet to feed, like with fried chicken, pig's feet, or rice pilaf. And they said my generation was freaky. And that is 26. I hope you learned something new in this video, and I of course hope I made you hungry. I could have included even more stories than this, but I think this was packed with enough information. In celebration of Black History Month, you can get the list of over 100 sources for this video free on Patreon when you become a member. Membership is free and does not require a monthly payment, but you can still get early sneak peeks to content and freebies like this source list. The link is in my description box. How will you honor this history this Black History Month? I'm gonna make meatloaf with some really quality breadcrumbs in honor of Joseph Lee. Tell me how you plan to celebrate Black food history this month in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you like, comment, and subscribe.